Time for us to get started, and we have lots of visitors with us tonight, and we're really thankful that you're here. And we are studying the Bible during this period of time, and we're looking at Genesis chapter 12. So it is our practice to, over about a 3.5, 4-year period, study the whole Bible narrative, and we've just gotten started with that this month for another round of that, and so we've made it to Genesis chapter 12. And so we're glad that you're here to join with us in that. We welcome all your comments and questions that you might have. Not sure that we'll have all the answers, but we'll do the best we can with the time that we've got. So we're going to pick up really at the end of chapter 11. That's kind of where we left off last time. And just as a way of review, let's think about our chapter contents as we make our way through the book of Genesis. Chapter 1 is, of course, creation, right? And the crowning achievement of that creation is man and woman created in God's image. And then in chapter 2, we get more details about that. And what are some important lessons from chapter 2 about the creation of man and woman that we need to take hold of? They're made in God's image, that's right. What else are they? What else is given to them? What's entrusted to them in chapter 2? A garden and responsibility and care for that garden. And there's restrictions placed on that responsibility, and there's a prohibition that they're not to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which then, of course, takes us to chapter 3, which is what? The narrative of the first sin, where they crossed the boundary that God had placed. Now, from chapter 4 all the way to chapter 6, we have kind of a downward spiral of humanity. So whether that's Cain and Abel, whether that's exemplified by Lamech, whether it's demonstrated by the early verses of chapter 6, we have a downward spiral. God cleanses the world with a flood, and we talked about last time that what that does is it's starting over the creation process. So it's interesting, the language in chapter 8 is almost like a reversal of chapter 1. If you look at some of the language there of what's happening. So instead of the waters being pulled back and land being brought forward, now the waters being pulled back. And then in the beginning of chapter 9, Noah is given very similar instructions and blessings as Adam and Eve were given in chapter 1. And so we kind of have a recreation, a new creation, as it were. But, and then that solves the issue, and everything is fine, and people respond appropriately to God's instructions, right? No. So what exemplifies the continued rebellion of humanity? The Tower of Babel, right? Let's build this tower. Let's make a name for ourselves. Let's not do what God has told us to do. Let's build a tower that reaches to the heavens, and God comes and He confuses the language. Now, but in chapter 10, we got 3 genealogies, really focused on 2. We focused on Japheth's and we focused on Ham's genealogies. Now we're going to kind of set those to the side now, and we're going to focus on Shem's genealogy here at the end of chapter 11. And it's interesting, it parallels with the genealogy in chapter 5, right? There's 10 names, there's 3 sons at the end of the list, but there's a difference here, and I don't know if you've noticed this. I didn't until somebody pointed it out. Remember in chapter 5, what was the recurring phrase over and over and over? And he died, and he died, and he died, right? Which is almost, I think, not almost, I think it is explicitly, it's not explicitly. I think it is intended to point us to the fact that these are the consequences of sin, right? That this is the effect that sin is having. That is left out of the genealogy in chapter 11, not because that's not happening, but because that is, it's old hat by now. Right, we understand that that's the way that things go. And so I don't, you have anything you'd like to say about this genealogy in particular? I don't either, other than we are tracing Shem's genealogy, and we're going to come down finally to verse 26 to a man named Terah, who had lived 70 years and fathered Abraham, Nahor, and Haran. Anything that you would like to say? That was a kind of a sweeping overview of what we've covered so far. Anything you think we've left out, or you'd like to say, something you've been thinking about?
One thing I might point out real quick was, in Bob's book, he pointed out how Peleg there would have been one that lived during the Tower of Babel.
Yes.
And it's kind of interesting to see how that fits right in the middle of this genealogy.
Yeah, that's right. And I think going back up to back in chapter 10 and verse 25 Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided. I think that's what we're talking about there with the earth being divided. I think we're talking about the Tower of Babel. And then if you look at the chronology, I think it seems to fit there as well. All right. You were going to say something, Alan?
So in chapter 3, we have the introduction to sin and also the solution to sin. We're alluding to that.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, we didn't make mention of that in our review, but that's obviously extremely important. So chapters 1 through 11, in talking about the origins of our world, I think we said this last time, do not answer all the questions that we would like to have answered about all of that, right? And sometimes raises more questions maybe than we would like. But the point of those chapters is to tell us where our world came from, what its original design was, and why it looks the way that it does now. And so chapters 1 through 11, we can summarize as the history of humanity, or the beginning of humanity. And then as we come to the end of chapter 11, we're going to be introduced to one particular man. So as I think you've noticed as we've gone through, that God has refused to give up on humanity totally. Right? So that doesn't mean there's not consequences to sin. That doesn't mean there aren't repercussions to their actions, but he refuses to just do away with the whole project. So how is he going to redeem? How is he going to rescue this project? How is he going to save humanity? The end of chapter 11 and beginning of chapter 12 set us out on the ultimate mission that will be the means by which God reconciles the rebellious world to himself. So the whole world, chapter 11, stands in rebellion to him. Every nation, as we know it, has its origins in building a tower in rebellion against God. And now they're divided, not because they all of a sudden decided they wanted to please God, but because God confused their languages and they had to go their separate directions. So how is it that God is going to rescue this and redeem this? And that's what we're going to be looking at. Anything else before we jump in? All right, Brother Joe, if you want to take us at the end of chapter 11, verse 27 or so.
Now these are the generations of Terah. Terah fathered Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran fathered Lot. Haran died in the presence of his father Terah in the land of his kindred, in Ur of the Chaldeans. And Abram and Nahor took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Iscah. Now Sarai was barren, she had no child. Terah took Abram his son, and Lot, the son of Haran, his grandson, and Sarai, his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went forth together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go into the land of Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. The days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. So here we have a very brief summary. We have other places that give a little bit more descriptive terms of this, but here we have this figure Terah, and he has 3 sons. What are their names? And Haran. And here, so we see these 3. Of course, Haran is scratched off the list as far as moving forward because he dies. So we're not given much information other than who his children are, especially his son, because he's such a prominent character as the story unfolds. But Terah takes his kindred here, and they leave their homeland. Now, where's their homeland? Ur of the Chaldeans, which is a long ways from Canaan, way over in Mesopotamia, near the Persian Gulf. So this is a long trip. So Terah takes his family, takes their possessions, and they leave. And where do they go? They're heading toward Canaan, but yeah, they stop in Haran. And now we don't have a map, but if you have a map, you'd think, boy, the closest distance between 2 points is a straight line. But you have Arabian desert between Canaan and Ur, as it were. So they travel the way of the Euphrates, which would be a prominent travel route, and that's why it carries them northwest to Haran. And of course, this place Haran, as far as I know, is complete coincidence between the name of this town and the son of Terah that had already passed. But they settled there for a period of time. We're not told what went into that, why they stopped there, why they didn't continue going. Maybe Terah's health declined. We don't know exactly, but we are told that he does die at the age of 205 years there in the land of Haran.
Yeah, and if you look at the narrative here, it looks like that God does not speak to Abram until they're in Haran, right? Do you see that? So they go from Ur to Haran, and then God speaks. But that, according to Stephen's sermon in Acts 7, I'm just going to note this. In Acts 7 and verse 2, Stephen said, "Brothers and fathers, hear me. The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he lived in Haran, and said to him, 'Go out from your land and from your kindred and go into the land that I will show you.' Then he went out from the land of the Chaldeans and lived in Haran. And after his father died, God removed him from there into this land in which you are now living." So this is kind of a two-stage process where he is called out of Ur first. He goes to Haran, and whatever the delay was there, whether there was crisis or Terah's health or whatever, God then, the text in Acts 7 says, he removed him from there and got him out of there. So when Abram will send back for spouses for his son, that's going to be back to Haran. That's where the family is going to be. I want you to just note this in verse 30. Now Sarah was barren; she had no child. That just seems like an insignificant statement, maybe a random statement in the context, but we're going to see why that's so significant in just a moment. Any comments to the end of chapter 11? All right, so let's make our way into chapter 12. This is going to be God's new way of blessing the world. Verse 1, "Now the Lord said to Abram, 'Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, and I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed.'" I don't think it's an overstatement to say that the rest of Scripture is the unfolding of this blessing, this promise right here. So what are the three key components that we often point to when we're looking at these promises that God makes to Abraham? What is he first promising? Land, all right? Land, then nation, and then we call it the seed promise. Now, that's important, right? Because we've been looking for a seed since Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15. We've been looking for the seed of woman who would crush the head of Satan. And maybe we would have already noticed that is narrowing a little bit. It's not just the whole human family that we're talking about, not just the offspring of woman in general, because we've been narrowing that genealogy down, that family tree down. Now we come to Abram, and God says it's going to be in your seed that all nations of the earth will be blessed, or in you, and in other places like in chapter 22 and verse 18, specifically in your seed. We'll say something about that in a moment. Now, so you've got the land and then the nation promise. Why does that seem incredible at this moment? Yeah, he has no children, and specifically Sarah is barren and had no child. And so in order for this to be accomplished, we are going to have divine intervention, right? This will not be by human means that this nation is built. It must be because of the promise that this takes place. Now, in Galatians 4, Paul is going to make a point from that. And he's going to say that Christians are the people who are the heirs of the promise, because this has never been about what human beings could accomplish by their own will. It's always been about what God was willing to do through them in response to their faith, as they respond to Him in faith. But we have here the very first indication that this is going to have to be a divine intervention into executing this plan. Anything you'd like to say so far?
Mm-mm.
Anybody so far? About land and nation specifically. It'll be the land that I show you. We'll get more details on that in just a second. Yeah.
Just to bring up what you Paul point Galatians chapter 4 with Ishmael and Isaac.
Yeah.
That that is definitive proof that Christians are the inheritors of these promises. Mm-hmm. That it's not an afterthought, it's premillennialism or something of that sort. But Paul distinctly says you are associated with Isaac, not specifically not the Jews. They actually end up being associated with Ishmael. So it just completely turns the sort of physical interpretation of this over and says that was never
Yes.
The point, as you said, the point was what God is doing, not what man is doing.
Yeah, that's right. And we're going to need to note this as we go through. When we're looking at Abraham's life, we learn lessons about what it looks like to live a life of faith. So when I say Abraham responds in faith, don't take that to mean that I just mean that he gives some kind of mental acknowledgement. Right? That's the furthest thing from what we mean by faith when we talk about Abraham. Right? He leaves Earth. Right? He doesn't have to close the garage door because he's not coming back. Right? Like he's just gone. And to do that required an incredible level of faithfulness and loyalty to God and to His Word. I want you to notice this. He says, I will bless you. And really there's more promises even worked into this than those three. Sometimes we emphasize those three, and I don't think unreasonably so. But notice he says, I'm going to bless you, and I'm going to make your name great. In the context of chapter 12, why is it interesting that that's a promise that God makes to Abram? Think about chapter 11. They were trying to make their name great. All right? There is a lesson in that. How successful were they in making their name great? Like negatively successful. Right? They're infamous as a result of that. But Abram, who is going to respond to what God has instructed, God says, I will make your name great. So in one of our memory verses in drill class is Luke 14:11. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. And maybe this is one of the first places where we see that play out. Notice this in verse 3, blessing those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all families of the earth shall be blessed. We kind of started off thinking, how is God going to rescue humanity? How is He going to redeem this plan, or this project? And this is going to be the means by which He does it. So the word blessing is used 5 times in these verses. I read today, I didn't fact check it, but that there are 5 curses in chapters 1 through 11. That would be that the promises to Abraham are going to be the means by which God cancels out or brings resolution to the curses that He had made in the first 11 chapters.
Well, later on, through Abram's name changed to Abraham. But you can see time and time after God said this, people that went against Abram or Abraham, God cursed them.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, to the point that they were in fear for their life because that they had done something to Abraham.
Yeah, that's right. Very good. Yeah, so, and people are blessed by being in connection with Him, like Lot, for example, as one we mentioned. And so this point that Stephen made, and that I want to bring out here, when God promised Abram a nation, there was a physical aspect to that, but that was never intended to be the sum total of what that promise was about. And this is a point, and the chronology here is actually really important. Like, we wonder, why do we have to worry about so much about chapter contents and where certain things happen? But Paul makes a specific argument based on that in Romans chapter 4. And says, when did God make the promise to Abraham that He would bless him and bless all nations through him? Did He make that promise to him before or after he was circumcised? He's not circumcised till chapter 17. Hint. Before he was circumcised. That's right. So what does that mean? It means then that the promise cannot be just for the physically circumcised. Right? It can't be that way because it didn't apply in that way to Abraham. It also can't be that it's only for those who live under the law, because this is 430 years before the law, Paul says. So that means that the promises that are available in Abraham must be available more widely than just in those who are circumcised and just who follow the law. In fact, it is those who follow in the footsteps of Abraham. Well, what footsteps? What steps are those? Faith, that's right. Loyalty, faithfulness, fidelity to God, allegiance to Him and His promises. Okay.
And it's also showing His righteousness to God, because when God told him to do something, He didn't make no excuses. He just done what He said because he was following the will of God the Father.
Yeah, that's right. So in Genesis 15:4, 6, and Abraham believed God and it was counted to him for righteousness. Anybody who looks at that and says, look, this is faith alone in the sense of belief alone, hasn't read or hasn't paid close attention to the narrative of Abraham, even to that point, and the investment that Abraham has made with his whole life in trusting it to God. And so, yes, Abraham believes God. He mentally acknowledges and he trusts that God is going to fulfill those promises. But he's put his body where his mind is in those senses. He's given himself to God in that too. And so it's the furthest thing from what we think of as belief alone or something like that. Okay. I think I've kind of sucked all the air out of the room.
That's okay.
Anything else through verse 3 that you would like to point out? This is a good place to kind of settle and make some points. But okay. So verse 4. You want to take that?
Verse 4.
Yes, sir.
So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. And Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people that they had acquired in Haran, and they set out to the land of Canaan. When they came to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the place at Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. At that time the Canaanites were in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he moved to the hill country on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. And Abram journeyed on, still going toward Negeb. So at what age did Abram leave Haran? At the age of 75. Now, I don't know if he was blessed with abnormal vigor or whatnot, but 75 years old, taking on a journey like this, we can just, here's another attribute we can add to Abram's faith, because he's not a young man at this point in time. And I don't think the Bible describes him at this stage of life as being a younger man in any stretch of the imagination. But nevertheless, God calls, he goes. And so they depart and they head to Canaan. And as they get there, what is one of the first things Abram does? Builds an altar. You see the priority in this man's life, the things that he's mindful of. A lot of times when we're doing things, sometimes the Lord is an afterthought, and the things of this life is more of a priority for us. But this man, he as the scripture says, he acknowledged himself as a pilgrim. He acknowledged that this life was not all that he was focused on, what he was looking forward to. He was looking for the promises of God. And we see that in every aspect of his life up to this point. He is searching to serve the Lord in every possible means. And as he arrives at Shechem, the Lord speaks to him again in verse 7. And here's another one of those important promises. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." To what offspring? As Larson said earlier. I mean, who would look at Abram and say, "Man, you got a bright future as far as establishing a nation after you"? No. He has a wife that is barren. They have no children, and they have no hopes of having any children. But God has other plans. And again, sometimes when we, this is what faith looks like when you're not able to see the end, but you still trust in God's promises. That's where true faith is established. That's where it personifies itself. And that's where God is really glorified, is when we cannot see the end. We may not even see the path, much less the end, but we trust in God's promises. And we allow him to work through us. After they leave there, it says that they go to the hill country. Of course, he pitches his tent between Bethel and Ai. We don't know much about these locations, but as we go through the Bible story, there are going to be a lot of events, especially as they conquer the land. We're going to learn more about these places. And again, what does he do? He builds an altar to the Lord, calls upon the name of the Lord. And it says then he journeys on, going towards Negeb. Anybody have any idea where the Negeb is? Or Negev? Yeah, the south, and that's exactly what it means from what I understand, the south. we're talking about the southernmost border of Canaan there. And so, you got anything you want to?
I thought it was a great point that you pointed out about his priorities. So I wonder if there's a specific contrast that's being made. He builds altars and pitches tents, right? So he's the things that he's making that's permanent are the things that are dedicated to God, and he recognizes that, for his own sake, it's temporary. And as you made the point, Hebrews chapter 11 says, look, he never thought that the ultimate reward of what he was receiving was here, because he says, for people who speak thus, like Abraham does, Hebrews 11:14, make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they had been thinking of that land from which they had gone out, they would have had an opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is a heavenly one. And so Abraham, even when he left Canaan, even when he left Haran, knew that Canaan was not the ultimate land he was looking for. That was not the city that he was ultimately longing for. All right, anything else through verse 9 that you would like to point out? Yes, sir.
As God shows Abraham and says, I'm going to give you this land, and later it's the God of Abraham, the God of Abraham, Isaac, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The Jews took that continued association of God as his promise to Abraham. I will give you this, right? That they took that to mean God was going to resurrect Abraham. That Abraham was going to participate in this promise. And otherwise, truly, what would that matter? Hey, 300 years from now, your kids are going to have this. Okay, that's not. But there's the Jews looking at this passage. The Pharisees believe in the resurrection. This is one of the reasons they believe in the resurrection.
Yeah.
Because Abraham didn't get to enjoy these promises, and God said he would. And of course, again, how is he going to do that? Well, spiritually.
Yes.
That's how. The same way we're going to inherit those promises is how he is. But they assume, of course, physically, that he would get that inheritance.
That's interesting. Yeah. So that reminded me. Paul makes the point in Galatians 3. So that when God says in you or in your seed, all nations of the earth will be blessed, that he was pointing to one. Right? He was pointing to a single individual. He says he doesn't say to seeds or to offsprings. He says to your offspring, which I think points to the spiritual fulfillment of these promises more than like a national or a geographical or physical promise. But that there is one person who's going to come and he's going to bring to fruition all of these promises. So yeah, that's interesting. To think about Abraham and how he inherits those promises. It's good. Okay, anything through verse 9? All right, so let's look at verse 10. Now there was a famine in the land. So Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. When he was about to enter Egypt, he said to Sarai his wife, I know that you are a woman beautiful in appearance, and when the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife, then they will kill me, but they will let you live. Say, you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared for your sake. When Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful, and that when the princes of Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken to Pharaoh's house. And for her sake he dealt well with Abram. And he had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, female servants, male servants, female donkeys, and camels. But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. So Pharaoh called Abram and said, what is this thing you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister, so that I took her for my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go. And Pharaoh gave men orders concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had. All right, so Abram, I will never get that right, so just accept it. Abram leaves the land of Canaan to go to Egypt. I'm not sure that he should have. I don't know. The text doesn't tell us. But God tells him to go to Canaan. This is the land I'm showing you. This is the land I'm going to give you. And when a famine arises, he leaves and goes to Egypt, which going to Egypt is never the solution in Scripture for the most part. Maybe there's an exception to that, like Matthew 2. But anyway, that's beside the point. In the Old Testament, going to Egypt is not the solution. But why would he go to Egypt? What makes sense about going to Egypt at a moment like this?
It's the same thing that even past that when Joseph. Anytime there's a famine, for some reason, God's actually give food to Egypt to where that everybody wants to go down there to get bread.
Right. Yeah, so in Joseph's case, right, we have a prediction and arrange and preparation table we made, but it wasn't like just random why Egypt had bread and nobody else did. Right? They have the Nile, and so there is a physical, natural, real reason why Egypt is famine resistant. They have the Nile. And so if you're thinking about this only from a logical life under the sun perspective, Egypt's the place to be during a time of famine. And so maybe that plays into Abraham's thinking here of where am I going to go when there's not bread somewhere else? Well, Egypt would be the place to go. Now, this is one of the things that makes me question the wisdom of him going to Egypt, is because of his mindset as he goes. When he goes to Egypt, he's not in a faithful perspective. He doesn't have a faithful perspective on things, right? How do we know that? What does he do? Yes, that's right. He tells his wife to lie. And somebody says, well, technically, she was his half. Yeah, that doesn't matter, right? The important part is that she is his wife, and that's the part that's being left out. It is being minimized to the point where now we're dealing with falsehood. Now, I read something this week, and this was the first time that this had occurred to me, that the reason he would do that was by being her brother would put him in the position of so if somebody would come and ask for her in marriage, he would be the one who would have the right of refusal. He could say yes or no. I don't know about that because it seems to me like people still might kill him if he said no. But that does make sense about why this would be the lie that they would come up with. And yet you've got premeditated falsehood on Abram's part here. And so maybe there is some fear in Abram. I know there's fear. But had he forgotten God's promise? What did God promise to him, like at the beginning of this chapter? Yeah. I'm going to give you a nation. I'm going to give you this. I'm going to give to your descendants this land. I'm going to bless those who bless you. I'm going to curse those who curse you. Abram should not have been worried about his life while those promises remained unfulfilled. Right? So while he does not have any seed to carry on a nation, while he does not have any seed by which to bless the nations, Abraham's okay. Abraham's going to be safe. And so this is, and especially the blessing those who bless you and cursing those who curse you. It seems to me that Abram has lost sight of that to some degree.
This also shows that Abraham, even though he had received these blessings from God, he's human.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, he feared to the point that he told his wife to lie. And even though I can understand your reasoning about him being the brother, that somebody would have to go to ask him. But when he comes into Egypt, Pharaoh is considered like God. And if he says, I want you, it don't matter who's in the family. Yeah. They go and take him.
Yeah, that's what this commentator said. That was the hiccup in his plan. Pharaoh didn't have to ask. And so he just came and got it. That's right. No, I think you're exactly. It does show Abram is human, and I don't think we should ever should say that. Well, like what are people going to do? Right? They're going to lack faith, but rather to say, what does it mean to live a life of faith? Well, thankfully, it doesn't mean a life of perfection, but it does mean a life of responding appropriately to what God has instructed us to do. So, in whatever instance, Abram is not right in this situation. But what does God do in response to this situation? Maybe you can take it from here or whatever.
Well, I'm just thinking when I look at people like Abram or, others throughout Bible history, it gives me hope because I know I'm an imperfect man.
Yeah.
If I looked at the heroes of the faith and that's all I seen was just perfection, just flawless service to God, I would lose hope in myself. Yeah. But here I see men of God even stumbling along the way.
Yeah, and doesn't it give it a ring of truth that these are not made up stories, right? Like,
sure.
So, I was reading a commentary about 1 and 2 Samuel and said this is David propaganda, that David is trying to justify his place on the throne. Man, there's a lot in there that does not justify David's place anywhere, right? And so it's the fact we see them warts and all. gives credibility. So Israel, people who say, well, this is just Israel making up a myth about its history to give it, kind of like a racial hierarchy or something like that. Israel is almost never presented in a positive light, right? Only as a tool of God's purposes. Steve, you want to say something?
Just the Egypt, though, in Abraham making that decision, now we have Abraham coming into the land from two places now.
Yeah.
Ur of the Chaldees,
Yeah.
and Egypt. And those really are the two places God's going to call his people.
Man, yeah, that's good.
In the other direction, he's going to call from Egypt first.
Yeah.
Land. But then they're also going to go to the Chaldeans.
Yeah.
And come back into the land.
Yeah.
And so Abraham becomes a type of his people. And I don't mean that, Abraham is making those decisions. It's more like Abraham's doing his own thing, which is not so great, but God's still going to use that to tell his story.
Yeah.
To go forward.
Yeah, so the children of Israel ending up in slavery in Egypt, and especially in captivity, right? Not God's design, but still able to accomplish his purpose through that too. And maybe so we've been studying through Isaiah and talking about God going to gather his people from all different directions and ultimately in the spiritual kingdom. And so Abram serves as a type of that, right? It doesn't matter where God's people are. He will bring them back to himself. That's beautiful. That's good.
So one thing I also kind of, God used Sarah because they went to Egypt because of a famine.
Yeah.
So God used Sarah and Pharaoh, or God blessed Abram through Sarah because they left with sheep and oxen and servants and things they didn't have before.
Yeah, yeah.
So God was still blessing Abraham even though he had Sarah alive.
That's interesting. That's good. So thinking about that, Abram saves his own neck, but where's his concern for Sarah? It's right. It's like, good luck. Hope things go. And maybe at this point, like there's nothing he can do. But even in formulating the plan, there's not a ton of concern for Sarah's well-being. And yet, as you may mention, God blesses Abraham. So,
it appears that he felt like Sarah was holding all the cards.
Yeah.
As they were really going into
That's
Egypt
right.
anyway.
Yeah.
So she possessed all the cards. He was just a player in this, and he was trying to secure his position.
Yeah, he knew he was going to be on the outs pretty quick.
Sure.
So maybe that was part of his plan, as he thought that this was going to be protection for him. So it is interesting to me that Abram is rebuked by a pagan. So Pharaoh would not have any confidence in the God of the Bible. And he says, this was not right, what you've done to me. This was not what you ought to have done. And so here you have the hero of faith, the father of faith, being rebuked by a pagan Pharaoh. And so that's interesting. And then as you come to the end of the chapter here, think about the other parallels to the Exodus. So first of all, a famine in Canaan leads them to Egypt. Parallel. There is a fear of killing the males and saving the females, right? Like killing the baby. There are plagues on the Egyptians. The Lord delivers them. God's people are driven out, and then they go into the south country or into the Negev from there. So in other ways, this serves as kind of a preview of the Exodus itself.
As you pointed out just a moment ago, Abraham and Sarah left having plundered.
Oh, yes, that's right. Very good. Yeah. All right. Anything through the end of chapter 12?
Seems to be a very abbreviated story too. Like I think there's like lots of details left out. And it's interesting that we get what we get.
Uh-huh.
I guess we pull from the importance of the details that are provided because it's a very abbreviated story.
Yeah, that's right. So, yeah, that's true.
And back to your point about the imperfections of Abram and all the others, those who we look up to, especially they're mentioned in Hebrews, we see him repeat the same mistake with Abimelech. His son Isaac repeats it with Abimelech. And you just scratch your head at that, but yet, how many times do we do the same thing? It's so easy for us as Bible students just to look at this and say, hey, Abram, what were you thinking?
Yeah.
Well, Jason, what were you thinking?
Mm-hmm.
So, but it's just, isn't it so wonderful to live on this side of the cross of Christ, to have those imperfections blotted out by the blood of the Lamb?
Absolutely. And it's a lot easier to face temptation, it seems like, when you're more prepared for it mentally, spiritually, when you're prepared for it. But how many times does temptation just floor us when we let our guard down? Catches us off guard. Maybe this was one of those incidents. His life, he did feel like obviously his life was on the line at this point in time, but hard to say. We ready for 13?
I'm ready if you are.
Okay.
All right.
Well, this looks like a lengthy reading. So, the possessions they take from Haran, the possessions they take out of Egypt really sets the stage as we go into chapter 13. So Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot with him, into the Negeb. Now Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. And he journeyed on from the Negeb as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place where he had made an altar at the first. And there Abram called upon the name of the Lord. And Lot, who went with them, also had flocks and herds and tents, so that the land could not support both of them dwelling together. For their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together. And there was strife between herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. At that time, the Canaanites and Perizzites were dwelling in the land. Then Abram said to Lot, "Let there be no strife between you and me, between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, for we are kinsmen. Is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if you take the right hand, then I will go to the left." And Lot lifted his eyes and saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, in the direction of Zoar. That was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself all the Jordan Valley, and Lot journeyed east. Thus they separated from each other. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled among the cities of the valley, and moved his tent as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. So here we have a conflict between the herdsmen of Abram and the herdsmen of Lot. Both these men have large households, and here they're trying to share grazing territory amongst their livestock. And it appears they're in the hill country, so that kind of describes what's the fertility of hill country typically. It's not that great, and so they're not able to share the land there. And so this conflict arises, and Abram says, takes his nephew aside and says, we're kinsmen, we're blood. Let's settle this in a peaceable manner. He says, you choose of the land where you want to go, and I will go the other direction. Great spirit Abraham displays here. Gives Lot the first choice. He has the first right. And as he was able to look from the hill country, Lot is able to see a lot of territory from this vantage point. And of course, where is the most fertile land ever dwell? It's always in the lowland, is it not? It's always in the bottom. But here we learn one of those lessons. And of course, it's not come to fruition yet, but as the story unfolds, as we go into chapters, we're going to see that Lot, just using visual interpretation here, makes a decision with his eyes and did not investigate further to see whether it would be a good decision years down the road for him. But he makes a decision to take the fertile land down in the valley. And so we know that Abram stays more in the hill country and Lot settles in the valley. And of course, he ultimately winds up settling further south down in Sodom. And what do we know about the people of Sodom? Yeah, very wicked. So this is going to become a snare for Lot as the story unfolds when we go further.
Yeah. The verse 10 with Lot, he was looking, seeing, choosing. Who does that remind you of? Making this decision based on the sight so far in our narrative. Adam and Eve especially, right? Saw, and those actual words like saw and took are going to be used a lot. So like in the David narrative, it's the same words as in Genesis chapter 3. but we have echoes of that in lots of places in the Old Testament where people make decisions. I think in the Samson narratives, I think some of those places, the words for Samson are the same as Saul and took for Eve. And so what kind of decision is that? It's exactly as Brother Joel said. It said it's a decision made by sight. It's short-sighted, though, ultimately. It's reckless, and there's a lot of ominousness in this paragraph, right? So you've got the statement at the end of verse 10, this was before he destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. It's like, well, glad Lot's there before he destroys it. That's great for him. And that they're very wicked. And so you have a contrast between Lot, who is short-sighted and reckless, where Abraham, in this instance, demonstrates a great deal of faith. And it's almost as if he's saying, look, you go wherever you want to because I'm going to be fine. God's going to take care of me. And immediately after this, we're going to see in verse 14, God reiterates the promise that you're going to be fine, that I'm going to give this to you, and you'll be okay. And we'll probably have to leave off there for tonight. But I think that that's an important principle about the way that we're making decisions. Are we making decisions based on what God has said, or are we basing decisions on what we can see in the short term? And that's going to play out throughout Scripture.
In these early stages of the story of Abram, we're seeing these stories that are played out, and the Scripture doesn't necessarily seem like it's either condemning or condoning. Right. It's just playing it out as it unfolds. But as we it's gonna
we'll learn.
The story is going to be told in the end.
That's right. All right. Thank y'all very much. Glad to have y'all.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact us via email at quinn.church@yahoo.com. Also, if you're in the area, we would love for you to come visit with us at one of our assemblies. Have a good day.